Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy Roll Good. Today we're actually going to take a look at initiative in the 2024 Monster Manual. I know Treant Monk recently released a video covering the changes to initiative from his perspective at least. I was actually going to leave a comment on his video adding some more information, but then I remembered I have my own YouTube channel, so I can add that information here. So you're going to see a little bit of overlap on some of the information, but then we're going to kind of take a look at it from a more just kind of numerical perspective as to what the distribution of initiative is throughout the Monster Manual, and how for any of us who are maybe like, man, are we ever going to get to go first again? What does it actually look like for most monsters? That's kind of what we're going to dive into in this video. But of course, before we get started, if you are a new viewer to this channel or a returning viewer and you like what you see here, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps me out quite a bit. We're going to briefly cover, what the changes are to initiative in the Monster Manual, what kind of monsters have what kind of initiatives, what kind of bonuses they get, and how many of those monsters have those kinds of bonuses. Then we're going to look at the sort of like actual distribution of initiatives, both the modifiers and the initiative scores themselves, sort of by CR, by groups of CR, kind of by tier of play, so to speak. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into it. Let's start with just looking at, again, initiative in the 2024 Monster Manual. So in like page 7 of the Monster Manual, this is of course available on D&D Beyond if you have the book as well. So in the Monster Manual, in the beginning of the book, it talks about the different parts of the monster stat blocks. And of course, monsters have both an initiative modifier and an initiative score. And with the way that they calculated these things, it kind of breaks it down into sort of 3 tiers of initiative. The first one is just the dexterity bonus only. So the initiative modifier will be equal to the dexterity modifier of that monster. And then it goes on to say that some monsters have additional modifiers, such as their proficiency bonus, applied to that number. So there's actually 2 groups here. There are monsters who have their dexterity bonus plus their proficiency added to the initiative. We might call this proficiency in initiative, just to kind of shorthand it. And then there are some monsters who have their dexterity modifier plus 2 times their proficiency bonus added to their initiative. And again, we might call this expertise in initiative because it's sort of the same calculation. The description does allude to additional modifiers being added to the monster's initiative score, but there aren't really any besides proficiency bonus and 2 times proficiency bonus. There aren't any other random modifiers that they've added as of yet, at least in the Monster Manual. We might see something like that in the future, but currently all monster stat blocks follow one of these 3 formulas. Additionally, it says that if you are a DM and you don't want to roll for your monsters, you can use their initiative score instead. So initiative scores are simply calculated as 10 plus the initiative modifier. We might call this passive initiative, similar to passive perception, which follows basically the same formula of 10 plus whatever your bonus is to that check. Then notably at the end of this description, it also says that initiative is further detailed in the player's handbook. So I actually wanted to jump to the player's handbook to see if there was anything interesting that maybe I didn't really pick up on my first time going through it because I didn't have the context of the Monster Manual. And notably there was one small sentence there that kind of caught my attention. Not only can players also use initiative scores if the DM is using initiative scores just to make the process of initiative go a little bit faster, but the main thing I wanted to point out here is that it does say that if you have advantage on initiative, then you increase your initiative score by 5. And then again, if you would have disadvantage on your initiative roll, you would decrease your initiative score by 5. Likewise, I would assume that this would apply to monsters as well if they would have advantage or disadvantage. So in that way, surprise stays relevant because you can apply disadvantage on the monster's roll, but again, you're not rolling, so you're using their score, so you subtract 5 from their score, which can make some of those higher initiatives just that much easier to try to overcome. And notably, there aren't a whole lot of monsters that are immune to surprise. Again, the surprise condition changed in 2024, where a creature who is surprised at the beginning of combat just has disadvantage on their initiative roll, and that's it. And when I was going through the Monster Manual, I didn't really see any monsters who had like a trait that said that they can't be surprised or anything along those lines. So you shouldn't come across it too often. I believe gold dragons of a certain age, like the ancient and adult gold dragons, I think they're one of their layer or sort of zone effects is that creatures in that radius can't be surprised. But other than that, there aren't really any monster traits that I saw that said that they can't, be surprised at the beginning of combat or anything like that. So that is still a very possible strategy that you can use. It's also worth noting that the 2024 Player's Handbook does still refer to initiative as a dexterity check. This is on page 23 in the Player's Handbook. When it's talking about how to start combat and you're rolling for initiative, it says when you roll for initiative, you make a dexterity check. So anything that could buff a dexterity check could also potentially buff your initiative roll at least. Notably, things like guidance wouldn't apply in 2024 because guidance specifically is attached to a skill now, not just any ability check. And then there is one kind of small gap that I kind of noticed, and again, I probably wouldn't rule it this way, but in the Player's Handbook, it only defines an initiative score as 10 plus your dexterity modifier. It doesn't go on to specify that it's 10 plus your dexterity modifier plus any additional bonuses to whatever your initiative roll would be. And most, if not all, bonus bonuses to initiative in the player's handbook and beyond state that they are bonuses added to the roll for initiative, not to your initiative score. There's nothing in the player's handbook that talks about players having an initiative score. Even though we have that little box on our character sheet, it's not called an initiative score. It's just like where we track our dex modifier, essentially. I know like when you select alert on D&D Beyond, or like when you have your Gloomstalker bonus or your War Wizard bonus, it just adds that to the initiative bonus as well. But if someone were playing like strictly as written, your initiative score as a player would just be 10 plus your dexterity modifier, which is a little lame. Again, I would never rule it strictly that way. I hope whenever we get our first round of official errata for the player's handbook, but that they kind of correct some of these small things where they can kind of expand on the rules a little bit more and make sure that they're not kind of so hyper specific that they exclude things that players are just going to have. And now that we know how the monster's initiative modifiers and initiative scores work, and again, some of us might know that already, let's go ahead and look at the breakdown of how many monsters in the new monster manual either have expertise, proficiency, or just no additional bonus to their initiative. So we have the beginning of a table here. So we have their initiative proficiency level. Again, expertise, proficient, or none. Again, none is just their dexterity bonus. If we look at normal monsters, and by normal, I mean non-legendary monsters, we can see that there are 7 in the entire book that have expertise in their initiative. 131 of them have proficiency in their initiative, and then 320 of them are just using their dexterity modifier. If we then move on to legendary monsters, and again, legendary monsters are just monsters that have their legendary resistances and or legendary actions. There are a total of 47 of them that have expertise in their initiative. There are no legendary creatures with proficiency in initiative, and there are no legendary creatures who only use their dexterity bonus for initiative either. If we look at our totals, so there are a total of 505 creatures in the new monster manual. I haven't added the stat blocks from the player's handbook, so that isn't included in this, so the numbers are maybe slightly off there, but just for the new monster manual, total of 505 creatures. So there are 54 total creatures, 11% of the total creatures in the monster manual who have expertise in their initiative. 26% of them are proficient in their initiative, and then 63% are just using their dexterity modifier to their initiative. Whether it's positive or negative, it's just their dexterity modifier. So I think most of us are mainly interested in expertise in initiative, so let's look at the breakdown of that by challenge rating. So I'm going to bring up this table here. We have initiative expertise by challenge rating. The count row here is the count of monsters at that CR who have expertise in their initiative. The total is the total number of monsters at that CR. We can see at CR3, that's the lowest that we see expertise in initiative. There is only 1 monster out of 41. It kind of goes up and up and up. And then by the time we get to CR18, basically every monster at that CR has expertise in their initiative. But we can see there are some at lower levels, but not many. And then it kind of increases as we keep going a little bit higher. So we can draw some pretty quick conclusions from this information. First of which is that all legendary creatures have expertise in their initiative. So if you are trying to homebrew a legendary creature using the new rules, you can assume that if it is a legendary creature, you should be giving them expertise in their initiative. However, not all creatures with expertise in their initiative are legendary, and we'll look at those creatures in a second. Secondly, the majority of creatures in the new monster manual do not have any additional bonuses to their initiative outside of their dexterity modifier. Again, that's 63% of them who are just using their dexterity. Of the 26% who are proficient, the lowest CR where we see proficiency in initiative is CR 1/4, and the highest we see it is CR 17. And then for the lowest CR monster without proficiency in their initiative, we see that as CR 0, of course. And then the highest we see that is CR 12. And so again, if you're a DM trying to homebrew certain monsters and you're trying to do it sort of according to the new design philosophy of the monster manual, you can kind of assume that if it is a CR 13 or higher creature, that they should at least have proficiency in their initiative. And if they are a CR 1/8 or lower, then they should probably not have proficiency in their initiative. I mean, that doesn't mean that they can't, but that's just kind of the rule of thumb that you can follow based on the information that we have. But what about those 7 non-legendary monsters? Like, what makes them so special that they're allowed to have expertise? Because we see that, again, even as low as CR3. What is this CR3 monster that has expertise, and why do they have expertise in their initiative? Unfortunately, there's no explicit reason listed in the monster manual as to why these creatures have expertise in their initiative, but they do kind of fall into certain groups. The first one that kind of stands out is that they're just very, very fast. This would be the Rock. They have an 120-foot fly speed. That is one of the fastest fly speeds in the monster manual. It is not the fastest, but the fastest ones belong to, I believe it's the Solar that has 150-foot fly speed, and the other one is the Planetar, which has 120 foot as well. But again, those are both legendary creatures. So again, the Rock is just also also very big, very fast. It's going to get the jump on you no matter what. The second kind of group that these monsters fell into was kind of ambush predators, or just ambushers in general. These would be your assassin at CR8. The Grell is the CR3 monster. Death Slot, I believe, is the CR10. Roper is CR6 or somewhere 4 in there somewhere. I don't know. I can't quite remember where the Roper falls, but again, these are sort of all ambush predators in their own way. Assassin, of course, makes sense. Grells are described as an ambushers. Ropers used to have that feature called false appearance, where they appear as a stalagmite or whatever until they actually attack or move. They no longer have that feature in the 2024 Monster Manual, but they instead have expertise in initiative. So that's sort of the trade-off. While they don't have the false appearance feature, the sort of flavor text for them, the little paragraph that describes their behaviors and things like that, it does say that they look like, you know, any other structure while they're not moving, but it is no longer just a feature in their stat block. And then the Death Slot isn't necessarily described as an ambush predator or anything, but they do have invisibility at will on themselves only, so they are kind of an ambush predator in that way. While they all have their own ways of doing it, they all are sort of these ambushers in that little group. And then the last of these 7s are sort of the Seers and the Sentinels. So this would be the Cyclops Oracle. They have expertise in their initiative, and the Iron Golem also has expertise in their initiative. And Oracle, of course, can sort of see the future. They're, you know, your diviners, so it's much harder to get the jump on them. Then an Iron Golem, of course, is always on the lookout. They have one task to kind of defend whatever their charge is, and so likewise, they are ready to go at any given time. So they have their expertise in initiative. So again, there's not really hard and fast rules, but they're kind of implied suggestions as to when you should maybe think about giving expertise in initiative to one of your monsters. Okay, so that's all well and good, but what about the actual numbers? What is the actual distribution of this like? What is the average increase of initiative throughout the Monster Manual compared to monsters previously? So if you watched my last video on my sort of first impressions of the Monster Manual, you would know that I also took the time to build out a spreadsheet for all of the monster stats. I didn't actually include initiative on my initial build. I had to take the time over the last couple days to do that. I haven't uploaded that to the Google Doc at this time. And then again, for transparency's sake, the pre-2024 spreadsheet of monsters for D&D that I have doesn't contain just monsters in the 2014 Monster Manual. It includes some of the other ones, not every monster that was released previously, but many of them. All that really means is that the averages here are going to be trending more towards an average and be less skewed by having only, you know, one creature at a certain CR or anything like that. But I just wanted to point that out for transparency's sake. So with that aside, if we look at the total averages across everything, the average initiative modifier pre-2024, and again, this was just their dexterity bonus pre-2024. They didn't add proficiency ever before the 2024 Monster Manual. The total average was 1.4. In the 2024 Monster Manual, this is increased to 3.5. This is an increase of 146%, or roughly 2.5 times higher than before. That is a pretty noticeable change across the board. But what does that look like as we kind of continue through groups of monsters? And I kind of broke these down into the tiers of play as it relates to the player. So in tier 1, again, pre-2024, we had an average of 1.3. Post-2024, we have an average of 1.7. That's an increase of only 32%. That's barely a change. That's just some creatures adding their proficiency. Again, there's like 1, maybe 2 creatures that have expertise in initiative at this time. But as we move into tier 2, we see a big jump here. So we go from 1.6 pre-2024 to 4.4 average post-2024. So that is about 2.8 times higher than the average previously. Moving on to tier 3 in CR 11 through 15, we go from 1.5 to 7.8. Again, we're starting to see a lot more legendary creatures at this point, so we're seeing a lot more expertise at this time. That is an increase about 5.3 times higher on average. You know, we're basically getting to the point where players are going to start, you know, struggling to win on initiative against these monsters. You know, whether that's good or bad is whatever. That's not the point of this video, but this, you know, it's kind of at this point that you're going to start noticing that monsters are definitely winning initiative more often. But then as we get into tier 4, CR 16 to 20, that goes up to 11.9 on average in 2024. That's a 440% increase, about 5.4 times higher on average. But then when we get to CR 21 plus, you know, our tier 4 plus, the most legendary of legendary creatures, this jumps up to 16 on average, up from 2.1, which is actually lower than the previous one in pre-2024. That's a 650% increase over pre-2024. Again, about 7.5 times higher on average. And it's kind of interesting because looking at it this way, it might feel like, oh my gosh, it's so impossible. How are we ever going going to beat these scores. Treant Monk did do a pretty good job of going through, all the different ways that players have to increase their initiative rolls. There's a lot of different ways, but what I think is a better way to look at this is actually to look at initiative scores. And again, initiative scores didn't actually technically exist pre-2024, but all we need to do is add 10 to the initiative. If we do that, then it's going to change how the numbers look, and that's going to be a little bit more representative of what the actual roll would look like, because the initiative score is essentially the average roll on initiative for that creature. Technically the average on a d20 is a 10.5 and they're rounding down to 10, but again, 10 is the average. They're just adding their initiative modifier on top of that. So that is the average initiative roll for that creature. So if we look at the table for initiative scores, then we see that these numbers are actually a lot closer together. So the total average increase across the whole monster manual is only 18% increase. In tier 1, the initiative score is only up by about 3%. In tier 2, the initiative score is only up about 24%. Tier 3 is only up by 55%. Tier 4 is up by 79%. And it's not really until we get to tier 4 plus, our super legendary creatures at CR 21 or higher, that we see that the average initiative roll is over doubled, 2.14 times higher than the previous average roll. So for anyone who's maybe feeling like, man, we're never going to win initiative, first of all, we can see that in CRs 1 through 10, basically, these initiatives are still very beatable. That's 11.7. Basically, an initiative 12 to 15, even if you just have a small bonus to initiative, you can match or beat that pretty easily. If you're looking at CRs 11 through 20, this is probably the point where you're going to start winning at least 2 good initiative bonuses. That's either like high dex or the alert feat, or having some sort of roll to your initiative that you add, or some sort of bonus from your subclass. Having advantage on your initiative is also very good at this point, because these are still very reachable numbers. They're just a little bit higher than normal. And it's not really until you get to CR 21 plus and the average roll starts becoming 26 or higher that you're going to start wanting to maybe stack a lot of these bonuses, like having alert, having good dex, having a roll, having advantage, using teamwork with like the dance bar. The old Watcher's Paladin can add their proficiency bonus to their party's initiative rolls as well. So still very beatable, and still very beatable throughout the majority of the game. But if you want to beat these higher level monsters on their initiative, you want to plan around it. So if you're doing a one shot or something like that, and you maybe want to take it a little bit more seriously, you might try to organize with your party how you're going to buff your guys' initiative to try to get the jump on that creature. And that's all I have for this video. Hopefully for anyone who's maybe feeling a little bit bad about how high initiative is in the 2024 Monster Manual, hopefully this makes you feel a little bit better about that, because again, it's not really until the higher CRs that you're really seeing those scores. And even then, in that sort of tier 3, early tier 4 levels of play, they're not that much higher. If you're the kind of person who cares about your initiative and you're trying to invest in it in some way, you're going to win some and you're going to lose some. If that isn't important to you, then you just don't need to worry about it. But yeah, that's all I had for this video. So if you have any special insights into some parts of initiative that maybe I didn't cover in this video that maybe I'm not aware of, or maybe I just didn't bring it up, one way or the other, let me know down in the comments down below kind of what your perspective is on it, what your experience has been if you've done any high level one shots with it, especially if you've had a party that tried to build around and boosting their initiative and how that went. I would love to hear about that. So let me know all that down in the comments down below. And again, while you're going down to those comments, please hit that like button. If you are a new viewer or returning viewer and you like what you see here and you want to see more information from me in the future, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Again, it helps me out quite a bit. I release videos every Wednesday and Sunday, so you always have something to look forward to. I appreciate all of your time, and I'll see you in the next one.